Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm your narrator Giles with a J and we're on Season 22, Family Annihilators Part 2. I already did a season of Family Annihilators years ago and you can check the description for a link to a playlist of all of those videos. Otherwise, on with the show. When firefighters arrived at the scene of a fire in Shropshire, the driveway was intentionally blocked and the fire was so intense they believed it could have been some sort of terrorism. The property was home to a wealthy family and the fear was that they had either been kidnapped or killed due to some shady business dealings gone bad. It took 5 days for the fire to be extinguished and the scene to be cool enough for investigators to start collecting evidence, and when they did, they realized that the person who had set the fire was much closer than they thought. This is Monsters. Before we begin, I just want to make sure you know that my other show, Sinister, is back up and there are 3 episodes a week. They're dark stories from history, and if you like this show, you'll probably like that one. Give it a shot. There are links in the description. Thanks. Christopher Foster did not come from a wealthy family. He was working in sales in 1988 when the Piper Alpha oil platform caught fire, killing 165 people. Because of that, he invented a new chemical formula for oil rig insulation that would protect the shut-off valves on the rig so the flow of fuel could be stopped, effectively shortening the life of the fire. He mortgaged his house in order to pay for a huge demonstration for potential buyers, and it worked. The product, called Ulva Shield, was a success and he was soon bringing in millions of dollars. Christopher was married to his wife Jill and they had one daughter, Kirsty. With their sudden increase in income, the Fosters were able to finance their dream lifestyle. They purchased a £1.2 million home in Shropshire on 16 acres or 6.5 hectares of land. The property had a stable and they had horses for their daughter Kirsty. She was a strong rider who was involved in equine competitions. On the surface, the Fosters looked like a loving family, but other family members saw things differently. Christopher's brother Andrew Foster would say in a documentary that his brother was a bully. He hadn't spoken to Christopher in 16 years due to a lifelong tumultuous relationship. Jill told friends that Christopher was controlling. It seemed to be common knowledge that they both had affairs, and Christopher's personal assistant would later say that they had an open marriage, but there's no way to confirm that with the couple. The Fosters had paid cash for their Shropshire house and didn't slow down with their spending. They spent hundreds of thousands furnishing their home. Christopher spent £50,000 on landscaping. They took lavish trips around the world. Christopher began collecting cars. He had 2 Range Rovers, a Jaguar, a Mercedes, an Aston Martin, and he and Jill had matching his and hers Porsches. He took up clay pigeon shooting and pheasant hunting, which allowed him to start collecting guns. He spent £100,000 having custom guns made. He always claimed that they were investments, but the guns eventually started becoming more than that. The housekeeper would later say that guns started being left out around the house. Then Christopher would use them to shoot animals that belonged to the family. Jill had a collection of doves on the property, and if they got into the garage, Christopher would just shoot them. He had a number of black labs on the property, and most of them were his hunting dogs, but one was a pet of Kirsty's. That dog was not as well trained as the others, and when it got into the neighbor's property and started chasing sheep, Christopher took it into the woods and shot it. Christopher lived as if the money from his invention would never stop, but it did. After the initial success, sales slowed and he was bringing in less money than the family was spending. In 2003, Christopher made a deal with a company called DRC, which gave them exclusive rights to manufacture his product. That boosted his finances, and it's estimated that Christopher was worth £10 million by 2004, but that number quickly dropped again. By 2005, he was struggling for money again and tried to break his contract with DRC. The company sued Christopher and won, which allowed them to take over the patent. That caused their financial situation to only get worse. In 2007, the Fosters were living on credit and Christopher's company was in liquidation. His salary was stopped and his assets were frozen. By then, Christopher had remortgaged the home 3 times and had 20 different bank accounts. One of them was overdrawn by £330,000. He also hadn't been paying his taxes. In 2007, he owed close to £1 million to the tax authority. People said that he had bragged about how his accountant did such a good job making it look like he made no money in order to owe 0 taxes. As if the tax authorities wouldn't eventually figure that out, which they did. His world was crashing down around him, and it seemed as though he was keeping it all a secret from his family. He told people that he was on the verge of closing a multi-million-dollar deal, but that was a lie. Leading up to August of 2008, most people said they didn't see signs that Christopher was going to do the unthinkable, but he did seem down. He had spoken to his doctor about depression, and he was prescribed medication. When a concerned friend sent Christopher a text message asking if he was okay, he responded, quote, "Not really. I think everything's coming to a head for me." He had confided in a business associate that he would rather end his own life than lose his family. He had said, quote, "They're not having my stuff. They will carry me out of the house in a box." Most people saw his remarks as the venting of a frustrated man. In August, the housekeeper found a notice of foreclosure pinned to the front gate of the property. It said that authorities would be there on September 2nd, but the Fosters wouldn't make it to that date. On August 25, 2008, the Fosters went to a barbecue at a friend's house where everyone said they all seemed perfectly normal. If Christopher was upset or nervous about his plan, he didn't show it. While there, Christopher participated in one of his favorite hobbies, clay pigeon shooting. They left the barbecue at 8:30 p.m. and arrived back home about 15 minutes later. Surveillance footage shows the Range Rover pulling in and the family getting out of the vehicle. Then Kirsty released the dogs from their kennel. For the rest of the evening, it's quiet at the Foster home, with only Kirsty communicating with a boy from her school via text message on MSN Messenger. A little before midnight, Kirsty sent a message from her computer to the friend that said her father was turning the internet off, and then she sent a message via text message that said goodnight. At around 3 a.m., Christopher retrieved a rifle and fixed a silencer to it before shooting 49-year-old Jill and 15-year-old Kirsty both in the head while they slept. He then went out to the stable where he shot their 3 horses and then did the same thing to their dogs. He moved the horse trailer in front of the gate to the house and shot out the tires. It's believed that was an effort to slow down anyone attempting to put the fire out. Then he can be seen on surveillance carrying pipes around the house which he used to pump heating oil from the oil tank into the house, which he then spread around with rags to ensure the house thoroughly burned. He lit both the stables and the house on fire and went into the bedroom where he laid down next to his wife. Though he had his rifle with him, he did not use it. It's estimated that he died of smoke inhalation before the flames reached his body. He had recently turned 50 years old. Neighbors called emergency services about an hour later, and firefighters started arriving at the property at 4:29 a.m. There would end up being 12 fire crews on the scene by the time the fire was finally extinguished. At the beginning, the fire was so intense that all the crews could do was stop it from spreading. It took 3 days before the fire was finally out. It was 2 more days before the scene had cooled enough for investigators to go into the remains of the home. During those 5 days, nobody had any idea what had happened to the Fosters. With the fire being so extensive and the driveway intentionally blocked, authorities initially thought they were dealing with some sort of organized reprisal. There was the thought that the family had been kidnapped and their home torched. There was also a rumor that Christopher had angered some Russians and they might have sought retribution. It wouldn't take long for those suspicions to be relieved, though. Inside the home, the remains of two bodies were found, and when surveillance was reviewed, it was clear that Christopher had intentionally set the fire. The two bodies were on what was left of a bed together that had fallen through the floor of the master bedroom. It was determined that those remains belonged to Christopher and Jill, but nobody was able to find any sign of Kirsty. There was a glimmer of hope that the teen girl had been somewhere else at the time, but that hope was lost when a small fragment of skull was found within her belongings. Her bedroom had also collapsed and went through multiple floors and then was buried by other rubble. It took days of sifting through the charred remains of the house in order to find more skeletal remains of all three members of the Foster family. The banks arrived at the property to collect anything they could to pay off Christopher's debt, but the killer made sure they left empty-handed. It's believed that Christopher ensured that everything in or around the home, as well as the home itself, was completely destroyed. He was seen as being bitter about his property being repossessed, and so he burned it all. The home was completely gutted, with only the shell remaining. His cars were all damaged. His stable, his horses, his dogs. There was nothing for the bank to collect, and people saw it as a big fuck you to the system. But it was a system he had abused, and it was nobody else's fault that he was in the situation he was in. He chose death and destruction over taking responsibility for his actions. At an inquest regarding the case, the coroner urged that better communication between doctors and the Firearms Licensing Authority be put in place. Christopher had discussed depression and thoughts of suicide prior to the murder of his family, and if that had been reported to the police force firearms officers, they might have been able to intervene in some way and save the lives of Jill, Kirsty, and their animals. Mental illness and firearms don't mix, especially when a monster like Christopher Foster is determined to die and take everything with him, including his family. Thanks so much for letting me tell you this story. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave a comment. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.